The spring wind carried a chill that cut through Willow Mackenzie's shawl as she sank to her knees in the freshly turned soil, her tears falling on 3 wooden crosses that marked all she had left in this world. Her family gone, her future buried beneath the unforgiving Montana earth. The year was 1873, and at 22, Willow found herself utterly alone on the frontier, with nothing but a broken-down homestead and the overwhelming grief that threatened to consume her. Isaac Blackwood heard her sobs before he saw her. The sound carried across the open plain, stopping him in his tracks as he guided his horse along the worn trail. At 30, Isaac had spent most of his adult life as a drifter, a cowboy for hire who never stayed in one place long enough to call it home. Something about those heart-wrenching cries, however, compelled him forward. He dismounted his chestnut mare, approaching slowly to avoid startling the grieving woman. Her auburn hair had come loose from its pins, wild tendrils dancing in the wind as her shoulders shook with each desperate sob. The 3 wooden crosses told him all he needed to know. "Madam," Isaac called softly, removing his hat out of respect. "Are you in need of assistance?" Willow turned, her tear-stained face a portrait of devastation. For a moment neither spoke, the vast Montana sky stretching endlessly above them. "They're gone," she finally whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "My father, my brother, my sister-in-law. The fever took them all in a week." Isaac nodded solemnly. He'd seen his share of death on the frontier. Disease moved through settlements and homesteads with merciless efficiency. "I'm mighty sorry for your loss, madam." "What am I to do now?" Willow asked, though the question seemed directed more at the heavens than at the stranger before her. "I can't run the homestead alone. I can't—" Her voice broke as a fresh wave of grief crashed over her. Isaac shifted uncomfortably, dust swirling around his worn boots. He was no stranger to sorrow, but he'd always managed to outride it, moving on before anything could take root. This woman had nowhere to run. "Is there family you can send for? Someone back east, perhaps?" Willow shook her head. "No one. It was just us. Father brought us out here after Mother died 3 years ago, said Montana would give us a fresh start." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. Some fresh start this turned out to be. Isaac gazed beyond her to the modest homestead in the distance, a small cabin with a lean-to stable, a half-plowed field, and a chicken coop. It wasn't much, but it was something that would be impossible for a lone woman to maintain. "Night's coming," he said, looking at the setting sun. "You shouldn't be out here alone after dark. Let me see you back to your cabin." Willow hesitated, studying the stranger for the first time. He was tall and weathered, with lines around his eyes that spoke of years squinting against the sun. His clothes were trail-worn but clean, and something in his steady gaze suggested dependability. In her desperate situation, she had little choice but to trust him. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. Isaac Blackwood." "Willow Mackenzie," she replied, accepting his outstretched hand and rising to her feet. As they walked toward the cabin, Isaac leading his horse behind them, Willow felt the weight of her solitude pressing down. "I'll have to sell, I suppose. Though who would buy a homestead this far from town is beyond me. And where would I go?" Isaac remained silent, turning these questions over in his mind. By the time they reached the cabin porch, a plan had begun to form, not one he'd ever imagined for himself, but one that felt inexplicably right. "Miss Mackenzie," he said as she unlocked the door, "I know it's forward of me, being a stranger and all, but I'm handy with tools and no farming. I could help you get this place in order before you decide what to do next." Willow paused, her hand on the door. "Why would you do that?" It was a fair question. Isaac removed his hat again, running a hand through his dark hair. "I've been riding from ranch to ranch for more years than I care to count. Never stayed anywhere long enough to see crops harvested or buildings finished. Maybe it's time I did. What he didn't say was that the sight of her beside those graves had stirred something in him, a recognition of the same loneliness he'd carried all these years, though he'd buried it under miles of trail dust and endless horizons. "I can't pay you," Willow admitted. "The farm hasn't turned a profit yet. Room and board would be sufficient," Isaac replied. "And a small corner of your barn for my horse." Willow hesitated. Taking in a strange man went against everything she'd been taught, yet the alternative, facing this wilderness alone, seemed impossible. "2 weeks," she finally said. "Help me for 2 weeks, and by then I'll have figured out what to do next." Isaac nodded, extending his hand to seal their agreement. "2 weeks it is, Miss Mackenzie." As Willow's small hand disappeared into his calloused grip, neither could have imagined how those 2 weeks would stretch into months, and how a simple act of kindness beside 3 fresh graves would change both their lives forever. Morning came with painful brightness, sunlight streaming through the cabin's small windows as Willow prepared a modest breakfast. She'd barely slept, her mind racing between grief and anxiety about the stranger sleeping in her barn. Isaac appeared at the door just as she was setting out cornbread and coffee, his hair damp from washing at the pump. He'd clearly made an effort to make himself presentable, though his clothes remained trail-worn. "Good morning, Miss Mackenzie," he said, hat in hand. "I hope I'm not too early." "Not at all." Willow gestured to the table. "Please join me. It's simple fare, I'm afraid." "Simple suits me fine," Isaac replied, taking a seat. He waited for her to sit before reaching for the cornbread, his manners revealing an upbringing at odds with his rough appearance. They ate in awkward silence until Willow finally spoke. "I should show you around the homestead after breakfast. There's so much that needs doing, I hardly know where to begin." "Start with what's most pressing," Isaac suggested. "What needs attention first?" Willow sighed, setting down her coffee cup. "The roof leaks when it rains, the north field needs plowing, the chicken coop needs mending, the well pump sticks." She trailed off, overwhelmed. Isaac nodded thoughtfully. "The roof first, then. Can't have you getting soaked in your own home." After breakfast, they toured the modest homestead. The Mackenzies had claimed 160 acres under the Homestead Act, but had only managed to clear and fence about 20. A small creek ran along the eastern edge of the property, providing water for the crops and livestock currently limited to 3 chickens, a milk cow, and an elderly mule. "Your father had good instincts," Isaac observed as they walked the property line. "This is fertile land, well situated." "He was so proud of it," Willow said softly. "He had such plans." Isaac heard the catch in her voice and tactfully changed the subject. "That barn needs reinforcing before the next big wind. I'll start on the roof today and move to the barn tomorrow." True to his word, Isaac spent the day repairing the cabin roof. Willow watched from below as he moved with surprising agility, replacing damaged shingles and sealing leaks. By late afternoon, he was securing the last section as dark clouds gathered on the horizon. "Just in time," he called down, pointing west. "Storm's coming." Willow felt a moment of panic. "The garden, I need to cover the seedlings." Together they raced to protect the small vegetable garden, throwing canvas over the delicate plants just as the first fat raindrops began to fall. They made it back to the porch as the skies opened, rain coming down in sheets. "Thank you," Willow said, breathless from their dash. "Those plants were my brother's pride. He started them from seeds saved from last year's crop." Isaac nodded, removing his hat to shake off the rain. "Your brother was a gardener. James loved growing things," Willow replied, a sad smile playing at her lips. "He said there was something miraculous about coaxing life from the soil." They stood side by side on the porch, watching the rain drench the land. For the first time since losing her family, Willow felt a small measure of peace. The grief remained, a constant ache in her chest, but the immediate panic of facing everything alone had eased. "Would you care to join me for supper, Mr. Blackwood?" she asked as the rain began to slacken. "It's the least I can do after your hard work today." "I'd be honored," Isaac replied. "And please call me Isaac. Mr. Blackwood was my father and I'm nothing like him." Something in his tone suggested a story there, but Willow didn't pry. They all had histories they carried close. "Isaac then," she agreed. "And I'm Willow." That evening established a pattern that would continue in the days ahead. Isaac worked from sunrise to sunset, tackling the endless tasks of the homestead while Willow tended the garden, cared for the animals, and kept the household running. In the evenings, they would share a simple meal and conversation that grew increasingly comfortable. Willow learned that Isaac had left home at 17 after a falling out with his father, a wealthy Boston merchant who had expected his son to follow in his footsteps. Isaac had headed west instead, working cattle drives and taking odd jobs on ranches throughout the territories. "I never meant to become a drifter," he admitted one evening as they sat on the porch, watching fireflies rise from the grass. "It just happened that way." One job led to another, and before I knew it, 10 years had passed. "Don't you get lonely?" Willow asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. "I'm sorry, that's none of my business." "No, it's a fair question," Isaac assured her. "And yes, I suppose I do. But loneliness on the move feels different somehow than being stuck in one place with no one around." Willow nodded, understanding all too well. "The silence in the cabin is unbearable sometimes. I keep expecting to hear my father's boots on the porch or my brother's laugh." "What was he like?" Isaac asked. "Your father, stubborn," Willow replied with a small smile. "Determined. He was a schoolteacher back in Ohio, but he always dreamed of open spaces. After Mother died, there was nothing holding us there anymore." "And you, did you share his dream of the frontier?" Willow sighed, watching the last light fade from the sky. "I wanted what he wanted. I thought if we could make this place work, he might find happiness again." On the 10th day, a driving rain kept them indoors. Isaac had intended to repair the wagon, but instead found himself at the kitchen table, helping Willow sort through her father's papers. "There are so many," she said, overwhelmed by the stacks of documents. "I don't even know what half of them are." Isaac carefully examined each paper, separating them into neat piles. "This is your deed to the land," he explained, showing her the official document. "These are seed orders for next season. And this," he paused, reading carefully, "this appears to be a loan agreement." Willow's face paled. "A loan? Father never mentioned a loan." Isaac studied the document with growing concern. "It's from a man named Harlan Weber in Helena. Your father borrowed $200 last fall, due to be repaid by the end of this month." $200, Willow whispered, horrified. "We don't have anything close to that." Isaac frowned, reading further. "There's a clause here. If the loan isn't repaid, Weber can claim a portion of the homestead as payment." Willow sank back in her chair, devastation washing over her face. "We'll lose everything." "Not necessarily," Isaac said, his mind racing. "There's still time. The spring cattle drives will be coming through soon. I could sign on, earn enough to cover the debt." "You do that?" Willow asked, incredulous. "But why? You've already done so much." Isaac met her gaze steadily. "Because I gave my word to help, and I'm not done helping yet." The truth was more complicated than that. In the days they'd spent working side by side, Isaac had begun to feel something he'd long since given up on, a sense of purpose, of belonging. The thought of Willow losing her home, having to start over alone somewhere else, troubled him more than he cared to admit. We'll figure this out, he promised. Together. The next morning, Isaac rode into town, a small settlement called Riverford, some 8 miles from the homestead. He needed supplies and information about the upcoming cattle drives. Willow had offered to accompany him, but he'd suggested she stay behind to tend to the animals. Riverford consisted of little more than a general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, and a handful of wooden buildings strung along a muddy main street. Isaac tethered his horse outside the general store and stepped inside, the bell above the door announcing his arrival. The shopkeeper, a balding man with spectacles perched on his nose, looked up from his ledger. "Help you, stranger. Need some supplies," Isaac replied, placing Willow's list on the counter. "And some information if you've got it." As the shopkeeper gathered the items, Isaac casually inquired about the upcoming cattle drives. The news wasn't good. "Delayed, most likely," the shopkeeper explained. "Heavy rains up north have swollen the rivers. Word is they won't be coming through for another month, maybe more." Isaac's heart sank. The loan payment was due in less than 3 weeks. "You know anything about a man named Harlan Weber?" he asked, keeping his tone conversational. The shopkeeper's expression darkened. "Weber? He's got his fingers in most everything around these parts. Owns half the buildings in Helena and a fair number of homesteads, too." "Why do you ask?" "Just curious," Isaac replied, unwilling to share Willow's predicament. "I've heard the name." "Well, my advice is to steer clear," the shopkeeper warned, lowering his voice. "Weber has a reputation for acquiring property by any means necessary. They say he's got the law in his pocket up in Helena." Isaac paid for the supplies, his mind working through their limited options. As he loaded the purchases onto his horse, a voice called out from across the street. "You're staying out at the Mackenzie place, aren't you?" Isaac turned to see a man in his 40s approaching, dressed in the clothes of a rancher but with a quality that suggested prosperity. "That's right," Isaac replied cautiously. "And you are?" "Wade Preston," the man said, extending his hand. "I own the Triple P ranch south of here. Heard about what happened to the Mackenzies. Terrible business." Isaac shook the offered hand, sizing up the rancher. "Word travels fast. Small community," Preston shrugged. "Listen, if the Mackenzie girl is looking to sell, I'd be interested in making an offer. That creek on her property would be mighty valuable to my operation." "As I understand it, Miss Mackenzie isn't looking to sell," Isaac replied evenly, though he knew the loan might force her hand. Preston nodded, seemingly unsurprised. "Well, if she changes her mind, have her come see me. I'll pay fair market value." He paused, studying Isaac. "You planning on staying around these parts?" "I haven't decided," Isaac answered truthfully. "If you're looking for work, I could use a man with experience," Preston offered. "Pays good, and there's a cabin on my property you could use." The offer was tempting: steady work, decent pay, and a roof over his head. A year ago, Isaac would have accepted without hesitation. Now, however, the thought of leaving Willow to face her troubles alone sat uneasily with him. "I appreciate the offer," he said, "but I've got commitments at the Mackenzie place for now." Preston nodded, his expression unreadable. "Offer stands if you change your mind. Good day to you." As Isaac rode back to the homestead, Preston's words echoed in his mind. If Willow was forced to sell, at least Preston seemed willing to pay fairly. But something about the man's interest in the property nagged at him. The creek was valuable, certainly, but valuable enough to prompt such a quick offer. The sun was setting as Isaac approached the homestead, casting long shadows across the newly plowed north field. The sight of the cabin, with smoke curling from the chimney and a lamp glowing in the window, stirred something in him he couldn't quite name. It looked like a home, something he hadn't had in a very long time. Willow emerged from the barn as he dismounted, wiping her hands on her apron. "You were gone so long I was beginning to worry. Got held up talking to folks in town," Isaac explained, unloading the supplies. "How did things go here?" "Well enough," Willow replied. "I mended that fence in the south pasture like you showed me, though I'm not sure how sturdy it is." Isaac smiled, impressed by her determination. "We'll check it together tomorrow." Over supper, Isaac shared what he'd learned about the delayed cattle drives and Harlan Weber's reputation. Willow's face fell with each new piece of information. "So there's no way to earn the money in time," she concluded, setting down her fork. "And this Weber sounds like he won't be open to extending the loan." "There might be another option," Isaac said carefully. "Wade Preston approached me in town. He's interested in buying your property." Willow's head snapped up. "Sell, but this land was everything to my father." "I know," Isaac said gently, "but it might be worth considering. Preston claims he'll pay fair market value." "And then what?" Willow asked, her voice rising. "Where would I go? What would I do?" Isaac had no answer. The questions she posed were the same ones that had kept him awake the entire ride home. "We've still got time," he finally said. "Let's not make any decisions tonight." Later, as Isaac settled into his makeshift bed in the barn loft, he found himself wrestling with unfamiliar feelings. His 2 weeks were nearly up, yet the thought of riding away left him hollow. In Willow, he'd found someone whose quiet strength and determination matched his own. In this homestead, despite its challenges, he'd found purpose. Morning brought no clarity, only the certainty that something had to be done about the loan. As they worked side by side repairing the chicken coop, Isaac broached the subject that had kept him awake. "I've been thinking about Weber's loan," he began, carefully measuring a board. "What if we tried to negotiate with him directly?" Willow looked up from the wire she was stretching across the frame. "You mean go to Helena?" "It's a 3-day ride," Isaac acknowledged, "but facing him in person might give us an advantage." "Perhaps he'd be willing to extend the terms if he saw you were working the land successfully. Or he might demand immediate payment when he realizes how desperate our situation is," Willow countered. Isaac couldn't deny the risk. "True enough. But doing nothing guarantees you'll lose a portion of your land, maybe more." Willow was silent for a long moment, her hands stilling on the wire. "If we go to Helena, who will tend the animals, the crops?" "I know a boy in town who could watch things for a few days," Isaac suggested. "Preston's son often hires him to help with odd jobs." Willow questioned, catching his choice of words. Isaac met her gaze steadily. "I won't let you face Weber alone." Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. The realization brought both comfort and a new tension, as boundaries that had seemed clear now blurred. "Then we'll go to Helena," Willow decided, her chin lifting with determination. "Day after tomorrow." The journey to Helena was arduous, the spring roads muddy from recent rains. Isaac had borrowed a small wagon from a neighboring homesteader, allowing Willow to travel more comfortably than she would have on horseback. Even so, by the end of each day's travel, they were both exhausted and filthy. They spoke little during the journey, each lost in their own thoughts about what awaited them in Helena. Isaac had managed to learn that Weber operated out of an office above the Helena Mercantile Bank, but beyond that, they were venturing into the unknown. Helena itself came as a shock to Willow, who had never seen a city of its size. Nestled in a gulch that had yielded millions in gold over the past decade, the territorial capital bustled with activity. Brick buildings lined the main streets, interspersed with wooden structures that housed saloons, hotels, and businesses of all kinds. Wagons and horses clogged the thoroughfares, while pedestrians navigated the wooden sidewalks. It's overwhelming, Willow murmured as Isaac helped her down from the wagon in front of a modest hotel. Try not to look too impressed, Isaac advised quietly. Weber needs to see you as an equal, not as a country girl easily intimidated. They secured a room for Willow and a separate one for Isaac, though the expense made them both wince. After washing away the dust of travel and changing into their best clothes, Willow in a simple blue dress that had belonged to her mother, Isaac in a clean shirt and the least worn of his vests, they made their way to the Mercantile Bank. Harlan Weber's office was exactly as Isaac had imagined, opulent by territorial standards, with a large desk, leather-bound books lining the walls, and a view of the bustling street below. Weber himself was a surprise, however. Rather than the imposing figure Isaac had expected, he was a slight man in his 50s with thinning hair and wire-rimmed spectacles. His eyes, though, were shrewd and calculating as he invited them to sit. "Miss Mackenzie," he said, consulting the loan document they'd presented. "My condolences on your loss. Your father spoke highly of you when we met last fall." "Thank you, Mr. Weber," Willow replied, her voice steadier than Isaac had expected. "I've come about the loan." "Yes, due at the end of this month, if I recall correctly," Weber said, though his precise ledger clearly showed the date. "I trust you've come to settle the account." Willow took a deep breath. "Mr. Weber, as you may know, my family's passing has left me in a difficult position. The homestead is just beginning to show promise, but I don't yet have the funds to repay the loan in full." Weber's expression remained impassive. "I see. And you are?" he asked, turning to Isaac. "Isaac Blackwood," he replied. "I've been helping Miss Mackenzie with the homestead." "A hired hand?" Weber inquired, his tone suggesting he suspected something more. "A friend," Isaac corrected firmly. Weber nodded, turning his attention back to Willow. "Miss Mackenzie, business is business. The terms of the loan are quite clear. $200, due by month's end, or a portion of your property, specifically the eastern section containing the creek, reverts to me." "We're asking for an extension," Willow said. 3 months. By then, we'll have a harvest to sell and can repay the full amount with additional interest if necessary." Weber leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "An extension would be highly irregular. The terms were acceptable to your father." "My father didn't anticipate dying before the loan came due," Willow replied, a flash of anger breaking through her composed facade. Isaac placed a warning hand on her arm, then addressed Weber. "Mr. Weber, surely there's some arrangement that could benefit both parties. Miss Mackenzie wants to honor her father's debt, but needs time to do so properly." Weber studied them both for a long moment. "There might be an alternative," he finally said. "I have business interests throughout the territory, including several establishments here in Helena. One of my properties, a boarding house for respectable working women, is in need of a manager. The position includes room and board, plus a modest salary." Willow frowned, confused. "You're offering me employment." "I'm offering you a solution," Weber clarified. "The position would provide immediate income and a place to live. You could sell your homestead. I believe Wade Preston has expressed interest, and use the proceeds to clear your debt. The remainder would give you a fresh start." Isaac felt Willow stiffen beside him. "That's your solution?" "That I abandon my family's land. It's a practical resolution," Weber replied smoothly. "A single woman running a homestead. It's unconventional at best, impossible at worst." "Miss Mackenzie isn't alone," Isaac interjected, surprising himself with the vehemence in his voice. "She has help." Weber's gaze shifted between them, calculating. "For now, perhaps, but Mr. Blackwood, men of your profession aren't known for putting down roots." The comment struck uncomfortably close to Isaac's own doubts. He'd never stayed anywhere long, never committed to anything or anyone. Why should Willow or Weber believe this time would be different? Mr. Weber, Willow said, her voice calm but firm. I appreciate your offer, but I have no intention of selling my family's land. I'm requesting an extension on the loan 3 months, with additional interest to compensate for your inconvenience. Weber sighed, removing his spectacles and polishing them with a handkerchief. I admire your determination, Miss Mackenzie, misguided though it may be. I can offer you 1 month, no more. The loan will be due by the end of June with an additional 15% interest. 15%, Isaac objected. That's highway robbery. That's business, Mr. Blackwood, Weber corrected. Miss Mackenzie is asking me to assume additional risk. The rate reflects that reality. Willow placed a restraining hand on Isaac's arm, much as he had done for her earlier. We accept your terms, Mr. Weber. Isaac wanted to protest, but the firm set of Willow's jaw told him she'd made up her mind. They left Weber's office with a modified loan agreement, giving them 1 additional month and adding $30 to their debt. That man is a vulture, Isaac muttered as they walked back to their hotel. 15% is usury. It buys us time, Willow replied pragmatically. And time is what we need. A month isn't much time, Isaac pointed out. The cattle drives won't come through until after the loan is due. Willow stopped walking, turning to face him on the crowded sidewalk. Isaac, I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. The seriousness in her tone made him pause. Of course. Are you staying? She asked bluntly. Because if you're planning to move on once we get back, I need to know. I need to plan accordingly. The question shouldn't have surprised him, yet it did. In truth, he hadn't allowed himself to think beyond helping Willow through her immediate crisis. The habit of impermanence was deeply ingrained. I don't know, he admitted, the words tasting bitter in his mouth. I want to help you save your land, but beyond that. Disappointment flickered across Willow's face before she masked it with a nod. I understand. You've been more than generous with your time already. Willow, Isaac began, but she shook her head. It's all right, she assured him, though her smile didn't reach her eyes. I've imposed on you enough. Let's focus on getting home and figuring out how to raise the money. The journey back to the homestead was even quieter than their trip to Helena had been. Willow was polite but distant, clearly preparing herself for Isaac's eventual departure. Isaac, for his part, found himself increasingly troubled by the prospect of leaving, yet unable to commit to staying. They arrived home to find everything in order, thanks to the boy Isaac had hired to tend the animals. The fields were greening nicely, and the repairs Isaac had made over the past weeks were holding firm. It looked promising, a homestead on the verge of thriving, if only it could survive the immediate financial threat. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Isaac broke their uneasy silence. I've been thinking about ways to raise the money. Willow glanced at him, surprised. Oh, Preston mentioned he's looking for experienced hands, Isaac continued. The pay wouldn't cover the whole debt, but it would help, and I could still assist you here mornings and evenings. You do that? Willow asked, her expression guarded. Work for Preston and still help here, Isaac nodded. It's not a permanent solution, but it might get us you through this crisis. Willow studied him for a long moment. Why are you doing this, Isaac? You could have ridden on weeks ago. Instead, you've taken on my problems as your own. It was a fair question, one Isaac had been asking himself with increasing frequency. The answer, when it came, surprised him with its simplicity. Because for the first time in a long while, I feel like I'm where I'm supposed to be, he admitted. Helping you. Working this land, it matters in a way that drifting from job to job never did. The truth of it settled in his chest, both frightening and liberating. He'd spent so many years avoiding attachment, convinced that belonging nowhere meant he could never lose anything. Yet here, beside Willow, he'd found something worth the risk of staying. Willow's expression softened. "I'm glad you're here," she said quietly. "I don't know how I would have managed these past weeks without you." The next morning, Isaac rode to the Triple P Ranch to speak with Wade Preston. The rancher seemed pleased by Isaac's interest in employment, though his eyes narrowed when Isaac explained he'd still be spending time at the Mackenzie homestead. "Got a personal interest there, have you?" Preston asked, his tone casual but his gaze shrewd. "Miss Mackenzie is a friend in need," Isaac replied evenly. "I gave my word to help her." Preston nodded slowly. "Admirable, but I need to know my men are committed to their work here. I can offer you $3 a day good wages for these parts, but I expect full days, sunrise to sunset, 6 days a week." The schedule would leave little time for helping Willow, but the pay was indeed generous. "I can start tomorrow," Isaac agreed, "but I'll need Sundays free." "Fair enough," Preston conceded. "Be here at dawn." The weeks that followed tested both Isaac and Willow to their limits. Isaac worked punishing hours at the Preston Ranch, then rode the 5 miles to Willow's homestead to help with whatever tasks remained. Willow, for her part, took on work she'd never imagined doing, mending fences, caring for livestock, and tending crops from sunrise to sunset. Despite their exhaustion, they found a rhythm that worked. Sundays became precious full days spent working side by side on the homestead, sharing meals, and occasionally allowing themselves a few hours of rest on the porch, talking as the sun set over the distant mountains. It was during these conversations that their relationship deepened. Isaac shared stories of his travels, the majestic landscapes he'd seen, the characters he'd encountered, the lessons he'd learned the hard way. Willow spoke of her childhood in Ohio, her mother's gentle wisdom, and her dreams for the future, dreams that had once centered on teaching, but now focused on making the homestead thrive. "I never thought I'd love this land the way my father did," she admitted one Sunday evening as they shared the season's first strawberries. "But now, I can't imagine being anywhere else." Isaac understood. In just over a month, the homestead had become more of a home to him than anywhere he'd been in the past decade. The thought of leaving, whether by choice or because they failed to save, it had become increasingly painful. "We're making progress," he said, reviewing their finances. Between his wages from Preston and the small income Willow had generated selling eggs and milk in town, they had accumulated just over $100, half of what they needed, with 2 weeks remaining before the loan came due. "It's not enough," Willow sighed, the weight of their situation evident in the slump of her shoulders. "Not yet," Isaac agreed, "but Preston mentioned a bonus for the men who help with the spring branding. That could bring in another $40. Willow nodded, though her expression remained troubled. "And the rest?" Isaac had been considering a solution, though he hesitated to voice it. "I have some savings," he finally admitted. "Not much, about $70. I keep it with a banker in Cheyenne for emergencies." "Isaac, no," Willow protested immediately. "I can't take your savings. You've already given so much." "It's just money," Isaac said, though they both knew that for a man with no home and no land, savings represented security and freedom. "It can be replaced." Willow shook her head firmly. "I won't accept it. There must be another way." But as the deadline loomed closer, no other solution presented itself. Preston's branding bonus came through as promised, bringing their total to $140, still 90 short with interest included. 5 days before the loan came due, Isaac rode into town to send a telegram to the banker in Cheyenne, requesting his savings be sent immediately. He was returning to the homestead when he encountered Wade Preston on the road, the rancher mounted on a fine bay stallion. "Blackwood," Preston greeted him, reining in his horse. "Just the man I wanted to see. Got a proposition for you." Isaac stopped his mare, curious despite his hurry. "What kind of proposition?" "I'm expanding my operation," Preston explained. "Buying more cattle need more hands. I'm offering you a permanent position, foreman, in fact. $5 a day, plus a cabin of your own on the property." The offer was generous, more than generous. As foreman, Isaac would have security and status, something he'd never experienced in his drifting years. "I appreciate the offer," Isaac began, "but before you answer," Preston interrupted, "there's more. I know about the Mackenzie girl's situation with Weber. Loan coming due, not enough money to cover it." At Isaac's surprised expression, Preston shrugged. "Like I said, small community. Word gets around." "What's that got to do with your offer?" Isaac asked cautiously. Preston leaned forward in his saddle. "I'm still interested in that property, particularly the water rights. I'm willing to buy it for $300, enough to cover her debt and leave her something to start fresh elsewhere. As my foreman, you could help her relocate, get settled somewhere more suitable for a young woman alone." The implications were clear. Preston was offering Isaac a way to secure both his own future and Willow's, but at the cost of her family's land and her independence. "Have you made this offer to Miss Mackenzie directly?" Isaac asked, keeping his tone neutral. Preston shook his head. "Thought it might be better coming from you." "She trusts you." The observation struck Isaac like a physical blow. Willow did trust him, had trusted him from that first day by her family's graves. Using that trust to persuade her to sell went against everything he'd come to believe about himself and about them. "I'll discuss it with her," Isaac promised, though he had no intention of advocating for Preston's offer. "But the decision will be hers alone." Preston nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Fair enough. Let me know by the end of the week about both the foreman position and the land." As Isaac continued toward the homestead, Preston's offer weighed heavily on his mind. The rational part of him recognized its practicality. Willow could clear her debt, start fresh somewhere else, and he could finally have stability without sacrificing his independence. Yet the thought of Willow leaving her land of them, parting ways, felt wrong in a way he couldn't articulate. Somewhere between repairing her roof and helping her face down Weber, between dawn to dusk work days and quiet conversations on the porch, Isaac had built something he'd never expected: a home. Not in the physical structure of the barn where he slept, but in the shared purpose, the mutual respect, and the deepening affection between them. The realization hit him with such force that he nearly pulled his horse to a stop in the middle of the road. He loved her. Not just as a friend in need, not just as a partner in their shared struggle, but as a man loves a woman he hopes to build a life with. The question now was whether Willow felt the same, and whether he had the courage to find out. Willow was in the garden when Isaac arrived, her hair escaping its pins as she weeded between rows of young corn. She looked up at the sound of his approach, shading her eyes against the late afternoon sun. "You're back earlier than I expected," she called, rising to meet him as he dismounted. "Finished at Preston's ahead of schedule," Isaac replied, securing his horse to the hitching post. "How are things here?" "The corn's coming along nicely," Willow reported. "And the chicken coop repairs are holding well, no more predators getting in." Isaac nodded, proud of her accomplishments but distracted by the decision weighing on him. Should he tell her about Preston's offer, about his own feelings? Both seemed equally daunting. "Isaac," Willow prompted, noticing his distraction. "Is everything all right?" "Just tired," he assured her. "It's been a long day." But as they worked side by side preparing supper, Isaac knew he couldn't delay the conversation. With the loan payment due in 5 days and his savings yet to arrive from Cheyenne, they needed to consider all options. "Preston made me an offer today," he finally said as they sat down to eat. "He wants to make me his foreman, permanent position, good pay, cabin on his property." Willow's fork paused halfway to her mouth, her expression carefully neutral. "That sounds like a fine opportunity. Will you take it?" "He also offered to buy your land," Isaac continued, watching her reaction closely. $300 enough to clear the debt and give you a fresh start." Willow set down her fork, her appetite apparently gone. "I see. And what did you tell him?" "That the decision was yours alone," Isaac replied honestly. "I wouldn't presume to make it for you." "But what do you think I should do?" Willow pressed, her eyes searching his. "You've worked this land with me. You know the challenges we face." Isaac chose his words carefully. "I think this land means more to you than just property. It's your family's legacy, your home. Selling it should be a last resort." "And Preston's offer to you?" Willow asked, her voice softer now. "Will you accept?" Here was the moment of truth. Isaac took a deep breath, gathering his courage. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether there might be a place for me here," he said simply. "Not just as a hired hand or a friend lending assistance, but as more." Willow's eyes widened, a flush spreading across her cheeks. "More?" Isaac reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "Willow, I came here planning to stay 2 weeks. It's been nearly 2 months, and I can't imagine being anywhere else. When I think of the future, I see this land, this home, and you." Tears welled in Willow's eyes, but her smile was radiant. "I've been so afraid," she admitted. "Afraid of losing the land, yes, but more afraid of losing you. Of waking up one morning to find you'd moved on as you've always done." "Not anymore," Isaac promised, his heart lighter than it had been in years. "If you'll have me, I'm staying. We'll face Weber together, build this place together, a home where neither of us will ever be alone again." Willow rose from her chair, moving around the table to stand before him. Isaac stood as well, tentatively drawing her into his arms. "I love you, Isaac Blackwood," Willow whispered, her head resting against his chest. "I think I have since that first day when you found me at my lowest and offered help without asking anything in return." Isaac tightened his arms around her, marveling at how perfectly she fit against him. "I love you too, Willow Mackenzie, more than I thought possible." Their lips met in a tender kiss, a promise of the future they would build together. When they finally parted, both were smiling despite the challenges that still lay ahead. "We still need to figure out how to pay Weber," Willow reminded him, practical even in this moment of joy. "My savings should arrive from Cheyenne tomorrow or the next day," Isaac assured her. "Between that and what we've already saved, we'll have enough." "I still don't like taking your savings," Willow protested. "It's not just your land anymore," Isaac pointed out. "If I'm staying, if we're building a life here together, then it's our land, our home, our debt." The following days passed in a blur of work and planning. Isaac's savings arrived from Cheyenne, completing the amount they needed to repay Weber. More importantly, they began making plans for their future together, expanding the crops, adding livestock, and eventually building a larger cabin to replace the small one Willow's father had constructed. 3 days before the loan came due, they rode into Helena together, the full payment secured in Isaac's saddlebag. This time, they approached Weber's office not as supplicants but as partners, confident in their future and in each other. Weber seemed surprised to see them, and even more surprised when Isaac counted out the full amount, including interest, onto his desk. "Well," the businessman said, adjusting his spectacles, "I must admit I had my doubts. Few homesteaders manage to meet their obligations so promptly, especially in challenging circumstances." "We're not most homesteaders," Willow replied with quiet dignity. "So it seems," Weber agreed, writing out a receipt. "Mr. Blackwood, I gather you've decided to put down roots." Isaac placed a protective hand on Willow's shoulder. "Yes, sir. We'll be building our future on that land." Weber studied them for a moment, then nodded. "In that case, you might be interested to know that the railway survey has been completed. The new line will pass within 2 miles of your property, close enough to make shipping crops and livestock considerably easier, but not so close as to disturb your peace." The news was unexpected and valuable. A railway connection would transform their prospects, making their remote homestead significantly more viable. "Thank you for the information," Isaac said, wondering why Weber would share it. As if reading his thoughts, Weber smiled thinly. "Consider it a wedding gift." "I assume that is the direction you're heading," Willow blushed, but her voice was steady. "It is, though we haven't settled on a date yet." "Don't wait too long," Weber advised, surprisingly gentle. "Life on the frontier is uncertain at best. Take happiness where you find it." They left Weber's office with more than a receipt. They left with hope for their future, and a newfound respect for the businessman who, despite his hard bargaining, seemed to have a romantic streak after all. The ride home was jubilant, both of them relieved to have the debt behind them and excited about the railway news. They discussed plans for expanding their operation, taking advantage of the coming transportation opportunities. "We should tell Preston we won't be selling," Willow suggested as they neared home, "and that you won't be accepting the foreman position." Isaac agreed, though he was slightly concerned about disappointing his current employer. "I'll ride over tomorrow, let him know in person." But Preston saved him the trouble. As they approached the homestead, they spotted the rancher waiting on their porch, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Preston," Willow greeted him, dismounting. "This is a surprise." "Miss Mackenzie Blackwood," Preston nodded to each of them. "Thought I'd check in, see if you'd reached a decision about my offers." Isaac and Willow exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. "We appreciate your interest, Mr. Preston," Willow began diplomatically, "but we've decided not to sell. This land is our home, mine and Isaac's." Preston's eyebrows rose slightly. "I see, and the foreman position." "I'm grateful for the opportunity," Isaac said sincerely, "but my future is here. I'll work out the week as promised to give you time to find a replacement." Preston studied them both for a long moment, then unexpectedly smiled. "Can't say I'm surprised. Saw the way you two looked at each other. Reminded me of my late wife and myself, years ago." The admission softened the awkwardness of the moment. Preston continued, "The offer to buy stands if you ever change your minds. But in the meantime, perhaps we can discuss water rights. That creek of yours has more flow than you need for your operation. I'd be willing to pay for access downstream." It was a fair proposition, one that would provide income without sacrificing their land. "We'd be open to discussing it," Isaac agreed. "Perhaps next week, once we've had time to consider terms." Preston nodded, satisfied. "Next week it is." He tipped his hat to Willow. "Congratulations to you both. Building something together, there's no finer thing in this life." With that, he mounted his horse and rode away, leaving Isaac and Willow standing together in the yard of the homestead that was now, truly, their shared home. "He took that better than I expected," Willow observed as they watched Preston disappear over the ridge. "He's a businessman," Isaac replied. "When one deal falls through, he looks for another. The water rights arrangement could work well for everyone." Willow nodded, then turned to face him fully. "So, Mr. Blackwood, now that we've saved the land and apparently announced our engagement to half the territory, when exactly were you planning to properly propose?" Isaac laughed, pulling her into his arms. Is that your subtle way of saying you're waiting for me to ask? Perhaps, Willow smiled up at him, though I think we both know my answer. Isaac grew serious, taking her hands in his. I don't have a ring yet, haven't had time to get to town since I realized I couldn't live without you. But Willow Mackenzie, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Of building this home, this life with me? Tears shimmered in Willow's eyes as she nodded. Yes, Isaac. 1,000 times yes. Their kiss sealed the promise not just of marriage, but of a shared future on the land they both loved. As the sun set over the homestead, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Isaac realized he'd found something he'd never thought possible. A place to belong, a woman to love, and a purpose worth dedicating his life to. In the months that followed, Isaac and Willow transformed the homestead. With the debt to Weber cleared and a steady income from their water rights agreement with Preston, they were able to invest in improvements. They expanded the chicken coop, added a proper barn, and began work on a larger cabin to replace the original one. They were married in late summer, a simple ceremony in Riverford's small church with Preston and a few neighbors as witnesses. Willow wore her mother's dress, and Isaac sported a new suit purchased specially for the occasion. The celebration afterward, held at the homestead, brought together the small community. They'd become part of ranchers, homesteaders, and townspeople united in wishing the newlyweds well. As autumn approached, they prepared for their first winter together. The crops had yielded well, the expanded livestock were healthy, and their new cabin was nearly complete, larger than the original, with proper glass windows and a stone fireplace that would keep them warm through the Montana winter. One evening, as they sat on the porch of the old cabin watching the sunset, Willow leaned against Isaac's shoulder with a contented sigh. I was thinking about that day you found me, she said softly. By the graves. I was so certain my life was over that I'd lost everything worth living for. Isaac wrapped his arm around her, pulling her closer. And now, Willow smiled, placing his hand over her abdomen where their child had just begun to grow. Now I know it was just beginning. Isaac's eyes widened as he understood her meaning. Willow, are you? She nodded, her eyes shining. In the spring. Dr. Thornton confirmed it yesterday when I was in town. Joy unlike anything Isaac had ever known washed over him. From a drifter with no ties to a husband, soon to be a father, building a home and a legacy on land he loved, the transformation seemed miraculous. I never thought I'd have this, he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. A home, a family, a future worth fighting for. You gave me all of that, Willow. We gave it to each other, she corrected gently. That day by the graves you could have tipped your hat and ridden on. Instead, you stayed. You built this home with me, where neither of us will ever be alone again. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Isaac and Willow Blackwood sat together on the porch of the home they'd fought for and won. Behind them lay the memories of loss and struggle. Before them stretched a future bright with promise, a family growing, a land thriving, and a love that had turned two solitary souls into something stronger and more beautiful than either could have imagined alone. In the distance, the 3 wooden crosses stood as silent witnesses to the journey that had brought them here, a reminder that even from the deepest grief, new life and love could bloom. As enduring as the Montana sky and as boundless as the frontier itself.